Hello, I'm Graham Sheehan and I'd like to welcome you to my program Beginning to Glaze and Fire. In other tower production videos you've seen how to make pots either by throwing on the wheel or by hand building methods. In this program I'd like to show you what to do with the pots once you've got them made. We'll start with the selection and general characteristics of electric kilns. After that I'll show you how to begin decorating with slips on leather hardware. I'll then show you how to formulate glazes, how to mix them, how to apply them to your pots. After we've done all that, we'll go through the successful firing of a glaze firing in an electric kiln. Before we get started working, let's have a look at the most fundamental consideration that we have to think about. Your clay, your decorating materials, your glazes, and your kiln all have to be one well-considered piece. There's no point in making clay objects out of high-fire clay if all you have access to is a low-fired kiln. Of course, if you have access to a high-fired kiln, then you can make the range of clay works that are possible. So the clay, the slip decorating, the glazes and the kiln all have to be consistent in terms of choice of temperature. So if you choose to work in an O2 earthenware terracotta range, then the slips and glazes must be consistent with that. Okay, let's have a look at some fired ware here and see if we can't make a couple of general points about it. Broadly speaking, clay products are divided into three categories, differentiated by temperature. We have low temperature, the terracotta earthenwares. Potters refer to it in terms of cones, so we would refer to that in terms of cone 04 to cone 02, say. And then we have mid-range ware, and lastly high-fired pots. The thing to note from this display is that sound functional ware can be made at any temperature. In the low-fire range, we've got an excellent piece here by Julia Micah, a Vancouver, British Columbia potter, and you can see that she's working in red terracotta clay here using a borax fritted base glaze, and you can see that her use of commercial stains and colours leads to a very painterly approach to the surface of the pot. We'll be dealing with this, the effects on this pot in much more detail in the subsequent video. What we've done here is used slips and a clear glaze over the top of terracotta pottery. This piece here by Gabriola Island potter Ron Holmes is an example of mid-fired ware. This particular piece is fired to a nice maturity at cone 6 and has a similar use to the piece I just showed you of slips under a clear glaze. And lastly, these pieces here, which are mine, are fired at high fire reduction. We have here an ash glaze pot. This pot here fired in one glaze with another one over the top of it, and this particular piece which has been wood fired to cone 10, and you can see that the effect of the wood is quite strong on the exposed clay body there. Generally speaking, you can say that at low fire it's more possible to get brilliant colour, very fast definite edged colour patterns. One could say that the ware and the glazes are generally not as hard and perhaps not as durable in the extreme as stoneware, which tends to be marked more by a rather subdued look to it. Although, of course, looking at this piece of industrial pottery from the early part of this century, you can see that the pursuit of colour in high fire can be amply rewarded as well. This particular pot has got a copper-based glaze in it. The most fundamental piece of equipment in this process is your kiln. Let's take a moment or two to look at the types of kilns that produce the sort of ware that we've just been looking at. Most production potters use fuel-fired kilns because of the scale involved, both the quantity of the work and the size of the work that's usually involved in a production potter's life. This particular one, a carriage kiln, is propane fired and fires regularly in reduction to cone 10, 11. A more appropriate place for a beginner to begin their experience in ceramics, however, is with an electric kiln. So let's go inside and have a look at one of those. We've chosen to work with electric kilns in this program because an electric kiln is the most probable first encounter that a beginning potter will have with kilns and firing. This particular kiln is made by Scott, a leading manufacturer of electric kilns in North America. This kiln has a 3-inch thick wall and is capable of being fired to high temperatures. Potters measured the temperature by cones. This one's rated at cone 10, which corresponds to around 1300 degrees Celsius. The kiln is organized into 2 main circuits, both independently controlled by a manual control here and here. This circuit controlled by this switch, this circuit controlled by this switch. Around on the side we have a time switch which you can set to provide an upper limit to the time that the kiln goes so that you don't inadvertently overfire. The kiln sitter is also equipped with a temperature limit switch which you activate with a cone inside the kiln. We'll show you how to do that later when we're loading the kiln. Several other features of this kiln are a support strap here to maintain the position of the lid during loading and unloading. Carry handles around the side to assist you in moving the kiln into position, and in the front here we've got spy holes to allow you to look into the interior of the kiln during a firing. Inside you can see the element wires spaced every couple of inches down the full length of the kiln wall. These of course provide the power that raise the kiln's temperature. By contrast, we could look at an older Scott kiln that we recently purchased and have a look at a few salient details here. First thing to notice is that the walls on this are only 2 inches thick by comparison to the previous kiln, which were 3 inches. This kiln's rated at cone 6. If you're shopping for a used kiln, some of the things to look for are, as you'd expect, mechanical sturdiness, that all the metalwork be in good shape, that the control box be all firmly attached, that the switches are all clicking to their positions, that the kiln sitter and the timer be operating. It's important also to look at the condition of the brickwork, look at the bricks for soundness. A little bit of chipping that you might see around the edges of this are signs of normal wear. This kiln's about 12 years old and is in excellent condition. Notice that the brickwork of the lid particularly is all very sound. It's difficult to deal with cracks in lid bricks. Probably the last thing that you'd want to do is plug the kiln in and check that the switches and the elements in particular are working, although I should say that elements are like tires on a car. They will wear out eventually, and these are a normally replaceable part of your kiln. There's a manufacturer's label that should be attached to the outside of your kiln, and it will list the power requirements of the particular kiln. This one says that it generates 4.8 kilowatts and requires 20 amps. It goes without saying that any checking that you do of the kiln, make sure that it's unplugged from the wall receptacle before you start handling any of this stuff. We see a similar nameplate on the new kiln here. Looking at this nameplate, we see that this kiln requires 240 volts of electricity, produces something like 9.5 kilowatts of power, and requires 39 amps. This is serious electricity, and the service supply for this kiln should be installed by a competent, qualified electrician. The manufacturer lists the requirements for the service wire and for the breaker that you'll require for this kiln in its literature. It's important that you follow the very comprehensive installation and operating procedures that the manufacturer has outlined for you in these manuals. When you're installing your electric kiln, it's important to take ventilation into account. While your kiln is being fired, quite a lot of steam and some noxious vapors are released, and it's important that these vapors be vented adequately to the atmosphere. If you're installing the kiln inside, particularly if it's in a space that's shared by people, then you've got to be quite active in your pursuit of ventilation. One solution offered by
The manufacturer of this kiln is called the EnviroVent, and what it is basically is a fan here which is installed underneath the kiln on the supporting framework, and air is drawn through holes that are drilled in the lid of the kiln, down through the weir, through holes in the bottom, and exhaust here to be discharged to a vent to the outside air. One final point to note in connection with electric kilns is that it's now possible to get quite sophisticated electronic controls that will assist you in firing your kiln. This particular unit is a wall mount unit that connects to the kiln, but the same thing can be obtained with this mounted directly onto the kiln. This electronic unit allows you to program in specific rates of firing, and also to do specialty firings like to hold the kiln at certain temperatures, either on the way up or as the temperature decreases. Now that we've covered the basics of electric kilns, let's go and get some pots ready for firing. Pottery decoration is a wide and complex topic, and you'll find some aspects of this covered in the Tara Productions series, Making Marks. I'd like to focus on one technique in particular, that is the application of slips under glazes. What we have here is the application of slip, which is a mixture of clay and colouring oxides, to the surface of the clay, some work done on the top of it, some contrasting coloured slip placed on, and then the whole thing wreathed in a transparent glass. The advantage to this technique is that it's particularly pleasant for beginners, in that the surface is quite forgiving and that the results are also quite attractive. And the other advantage to this technique is that it's transportable through the temperature mediums. Here we have a mid-fired pot with a similar thing. We've got a light brown slip underneath and then a blue trailed over and a transparent glaze over the whole thing. And here with this high-fired pot, again, similarly treated. Got a blue slip underneath, some excision from it, some colouring oxides perhaps over the top, and then the whole thing wreathed in a transparent glass. I've just finished trimming this bowl, and it's in the leather hard state, and that's the ideal hardness for the application of the slips. So let's get going with that. Slip is a mixture of clay and water that's mixed to about the consistency of thick house paint or buttermilk, and to that we've added various colouring oxides. This one's a white one. To this one here we've added some chrome to make quite a dense green. I'm using a kick wheel to apply the slip to the pot, but it's quite convenient also to use a banding wheel to keep the pot turning while you apply the slip to it with a brush. It's possible also to apply slips to pots by pouring it, by dipping the pots into the slip, or by in fact trailing it with some sort of a syringe like this. As with most ceramic colours, the colour that you see in the material is not necessarily the colour that will be in the fired glaze. In this case, the green slip will turn out green, but that's not always the case. For instance, this is a bright blue. The most attractive part of using slips is the way the surface of the clay with the wet slip on it responds to making marks. And you can do this sort of thing. Just supporting my hand here so that I can scribe a little bit off. Cut down through the slip to the clay underneath. Let's take another one there. And then we can do this sort of thing. And we can apply some contrasting colour there.
here. Bit of blue into the flower shape. Okay, that's that for that pot. We'll put it aside now and let it dry. As the pot dries, the slip will dry with the pot and stay adhered to the pot. That's the first essential element of a good slip. If you change temperature or have some particular requirement with the clay, you may have to do some experiments and adjust the fit of this slip to your own clay. We've done those experiments for you for this initial beginning point, and this slip should fit any normal terracotta. The ingredients for the slip, the recipe, is listed with the cover, and we'll show you later in the program how to go about mixing the slip up. Always got to be careful of handling the surface of a pot that's got slip on. You've got to remember that that slip is wet clay and easily smudged with your fingers. And that's that for that one. Let's put these pots aside now to let them dry. That should take 2 or 3 days under normal circumstances. We need them to dry thoroughly because the next step is to bisque fire them. Bisque firing is a lower temperature firing that we do preparatory to putting glaze onto the pots and doing a glaze firing. Here we are with some pots that have been drying on the shelves of my studio now for several days, and they appear to be dry right through. It's important that the pots be dried right the way through, otherwise there's the likelihood of explosion due to water content when you're doing the bisque firing. Bisque firing is a firing to a lower temperature than we're going to use when we do the gloss firing. It is possible to glaze pots without first bisquing them. For instance, we could take this pot and glaze it and then fire it in a gloss firing. The problem with that is that when you've got additions such as handles, spouts, knobs on lids, etc., the shock of dunking the pot into what is basically water and clay can be such sometimes that these additions will pop off. Again, this is also particularly important when you're dealing with some of the frail constructions that children make. So that the reason that we're bisquing is to make the pots more durable for glazing. Now there are several ways of testing whether the pots are dry enough to bisque. One of them is simply that they first of all must have this uniformly chalky looking appearance all over. Second is, if you make a piece, just a little sample piece at the same time that you're making your pots, you've always got the option of breaking it open prior to bisquing to make sure that the coloration is the same right the way through and that the piece is indeed dried through. A third method, and this is more qualitative I suppose, is to touch the pot to a bare place on your skin, either the underside of your arm or to your cheek, and if it feels cold, then generally speaking you can take that as an indication that it's not properly dried right the way through. Pots should feel like old bones, sort of dry and papery at this stage. Okay, before we load the bisque kiln, the first thing we've got to do is arm the kiln sitter with this indicator cone for bisque firing. Cones are used to measure temperature in ceramic applications. They're formulated to measure any temperature throughout the ceramic range. This particular one is a cone 010, and that's an appropriate temperature for a bisque firing of earthenware clay. Cones come in 2 sizes. This is a large one. We'll set that inside the kiln where we can see it through the peephole as the firing progresses. What occurs is that as the temperature increases, the cone melts, and in this particular case, for the small cone, the melting of the cone triggers the release of the kiln sitter. Visually, as we're looking at this kiln through cone through the peephole, what we see are the cones melting, and here's a pack of 3 from a previous firing. That would be the equivalent of this one as it melted over. Okay, let's arm the kiln with this one. Okay, we reach to the outside, lift up the gravity trigger, push down the outer arm of the sitter mechanism,
place the small cone across the two lower arms of the trigger mechanism and release this top arm, which would then set the central pin across the cone. Okay, the kiln sitter's armed. Let's get ready to load the kiln now. Some kiln manufacturers ask that you start the stack by placing a shelf in the bottom of the kiln. This is particularly relevant, of course, if you've got an environment. You need some space underneath the shelf for the fumes to be drawn down under the stack. Now, we have half shelves, so we'll have to put in 2 of those. Now, the principle involved with placing shelves in a kiln always is that you've got 3 supports per shelf. As we've got 2 half shelves, what we'll do is put down some small supports in the middle that will do double duty and we'll share with each half. You can buy packages of manufactured kiln supports in the same place that you bought your shelves, or you can use bits and pieces of refractory material. These are old kiln shelves. Okay, so we'll put the 2 in the middle. And then we'll place the shelf in, making sure that the center is securely on the 2 that we share and that the 3rd support is out towards the outer edge of the other shelf. And we'll place the 2nd one. Okay, now we're ready to load. With a bisque kiln, with a bisque firing I should say, what you're really interested in is getting as many pots in as possible. And it's quite okay in a bisque firing to allow the pots to touch one another. There is no glaze on the pot, and there's no reason why they'll stick together. The slips that we've used to decorate, of course, are not tacky at bisque temperatures, so we'll be able to allow the pots to touch one another, and indeed we'll be able to stack pots up. Looking at the stack, I can see that it would be advantageous to put a shelf at about the middle of the stack, and what I'd like to do is to be able to clear this picture so that I can put the jugs in the bottom. And I can see that this sort of a thing would be just perfect for that. So what I'll do now is put these posts in, making sure that they seat firmly on the shelves, no rocking around, and that they're on the shelf directly above the support underneath. The principle always is that you're taking load down through solid supports. Okay, so we've got the posts in. We've been careful to avoid the kiln sitter and to put the front one just to the side of the spy holes in case we want to look in the bottom spies. Let's go ahead and put some pots in now. Okay, so we start with these jugs because they'll be the right height for those posts. Placing them in carefully. You've got to watch out at this point. This stuff's very fragile, and if you knock it one against the other you can crack it. Next one in carefully right beside it. Tuck the handles in out of the way. No problem if they touch together though, as long as it's gentle. Okay, so we've got these cups, and it looks to me that end on end they'd fit just under those tilts quite nicely, so we're going to stack these up. Now the thing is, of course, that rim to rim they'll sit like so. What we don't want to do though is this sort of thing where we've got one inside the other, because then we're going to stress the bottom cup from the weight of the top one, and we're likely to either cause a crack in the edge or a problem with the handle there. So we'll put those 2 mugs lip to lip and slide them in. What you've got to be careful of is that when you place things into the kiln, when you stack them, that you're taking into account the fact that the weight has got to be transferred right down through the stack into the bottom floor of the kiln. So weight transfer is really quite a critical thing. So these bowls, for instance, we can put these into the kiln stacked, but we've got to be careful about the order in which we stack them. For instance, we're going to put the larger one inside the smaller one. Then the point of contact of the larger with the smaller would be around the outside rim here, and most probably this rim would crack. So what we want to do is stack them in descending order, like so, and then the smallest one inside again, and we could put a cup inside there carefully, making sure that we weren't stressing either the rim of the bowl or the handle of the cup. So very carefully we'll put that lot in and continue with the stacking. Okay, that's the last piece. And now before we try to put the shelves in, let's just check that we've got clearance over the pots so that when we put the shelf down, we don't squash something. So I'll use this straight edge to span from post to post to simulate what the shelf would do. Looks pretty good here. Good that way, lots of clearance. Uh-oh, here's a problem. So what we need to do is put some spaces in to raise the shelves above that mug. So I'm going to use these pieces of shelf here. You can use regular little supports, but over the years you'll find you accumulate little props like this to help you. Okay, so let's put the shelf in now. Center in first, line it up on your two central supports, remembering that you've got to share with the other shelf, and then lower down the outside till it engages. And we'll put the second one in. Center first, watch your fingers, and lower the outside gently until it too rests on the support you put in. Okay, now we can continue with the rest of the stack. What I'd like to do is place these two bowls in. Now, they're sitting quite nicely one within the other, and I can see looking in that the foot rings are directly above one another. What I've done is cut a pot in half here to show you again. I can't reiterate too often the necessity for making sure that the load from one carries through down to the other. So here we've got a stack of bowls, got the smaller one inside the larger one, and the load is carried down through the feet ring. So as long as you're always sure that you've got clearance here, you can keep putting bowls up quite a height, especially if they're smaller and lighter. Okay, let's put these bowls in, and before we fill up the remaining spaces with some other smaller pots, we need to put a cone in the kiln. So I'm going to place this support in here, and on that we're going to place a cone that we can see through this top spy hole. Now, I've made this cone a couple of days ago so that the fresh clay around the bottom is as dry as the bisqueware, otherwise you're going to have a little explosion here because of wet clay. So what you do is, this is an 010 cone for this bisque firing. It's important to read the instructions in the cone book. That'll tell you quite explicitly how to place these cones. But what they'll tell you basically is that the cone's got to be placed so that when it's situated, it's at a slight angle to the direction that it will fall, and the flat side is on the underside so that it can fall across the flat side. So you take a little pad of clay, press the cone, holding it by the base. They're very brittle, so don't hold them by the nose. Hold it by the base, push it in so that you've maintained this angle here, and now when the cone falls, it will fall like that. Okay, so we're going to place it on a little pad of clay so that when it falls and droops, it won't fall down onto the kiln shelf and maybe stick to it. And we're going to place it so that we can clearly see it through this spy hole. Slightly to one side of your field of view so that as it melts, it falls across into your field of view. Yep, we can see it quite nicely. Okay, so I'll put in a few small pots over here to fill up the spaces that remain, close the lid, and we're ready to begin the bisque firing. As I mentioned before, this kiln is fitted with an EnviroVent, and we've switched that on and it's operating. If you don't have an EnviroVent, recall that this kiln during the firing is going to be giving off steam and some vapors which might be noxious, so you've got to be sure that it's been placed in a well ventilated area. To that end, if you're not using an EnviroVent, then certainly you've got to be able to let these vapors escape from the kiln. So at a very minimum, you'd need to leave a spy hole open. Some manufacturers ask that you wedge the lid of the kiln open during part of the firing. Refer to your manufacturer's instruction book for details on the specifics of a particular kiln. Okay, so here we are with the EnviroVent on, all the plug holes in, and we're ready to switch the kiln on. The general principle here is that we've got to advance the temperature fairly slowly. So what we want to do first of all is set the kiln ready to roll with the kiln sitter and the time limit switch. So first of all, let's turn our time limit switch around to 12 hours, which means that after 12 hours, irrespective of what's happened, the kiln will be turned off. Next thing we need to do is to actually arm the sitter by depressing the central button until it engages. Now the kiln's ready to roll. Okay, these are the control switches. This is a manual kiln, remember, so that you're in charge of this. So what we'll do first of all is turn the two switches on to low. The kiln's now going, and we'll leave it go on the low setting now for a couple of hours. And in a couple of hours we'll turn perhaps the bottom burner up to medium, wait an hour or so, turn the top one up to medium, and let the firing progress. The idea here is that you've got to advance the temperature slowly, and there are several points in the firing where it's important that the rate of progress be quite slow. Perhaps I could illustrate that on a graph for you. Okay, we're shooting on this firing for about 950 degrees, that's our cone 010, and a conservative time to get to that would be about 10 hours, giving you a rate of about 100 degrees centigrade per hour. Now, the actual progress of the temperature may not be quite linear, but let's draw in a line like that and see if we can't observe a few things. Now, if you're relying strictly on visual information, really you won't be able to tell where you're at in temperature until you can see something into the kiln in through the peephole. And that will be at what's called the lowest visible red, and that's at about 550 Celsius. So that's the first time you'll be able to get an accurate realization of what the temperature is, and that should take about 5 hours. If you've got to it faster than that, then you're going a little too quickly. If it takes longer than that, then perhaps you could speed the rate of progress of the firing up. What you've got to be careful about is between 100 and 200, this area here, so between the second and the third hour. This will be the zone where most of the water is being given off by the clay from the pots in the kiln. So it's very important that you don't go through this stage of the firing too quickly, because that's when explosions from steam inside the clay body will result. The second point that's of particular interest is around this lowest visible red stage, up around here, where the actual crystal structure of the clay is changing a little bit, and there's a dimension change associated with that, and it's important that you don't fire too quickly through this point. So what you don't want to be is on the high setting as you go through the red at around 550 to 570 degrees Celsius. This sort of thing is going to take a little bit of time to work out as you gain knowledge with your kiln, but if you keep records like this and make estimates of temperature, and not particularly when you see the cone go down here, you'll know exactly where you are, then you'll be able to get an idea of the rate of firing that's associated with the particular settings on your kiln switches. Okay, I can just see a glowing red edge around the edges of the cones and the pots that I can see in through the spy hole. We've been firing for about 5 hours. We've had the elements onto medium for the last couple of hours, and that means that we've got to about 500 or so in 5 hours. Well, that's a good moderate rate of progression, so we know we're on track so far. What I think I'll do is leave the elements on medium for another hour or so until that colour's quite strongly developed. That'll ensure that we're through that point that I showed you on the graph where there's some sensitivity to the clay mineralogy itself. And once we're through that, we'll turn the elements onto high, and then we'll keep our eye on progress through the spy hole. By blowing lightly, I've cooled the cones a little bit and you can see them clearly. I can see that the cones are down, so what we have to do now is turn the kiln off and then let it cool overnight, and we can unload it in the morning. Here we have the cone from the bisque, and you can see that it's nicely down with the point at about the 3 o'clock position. The bisque looks satisfactory. Took about 9.5 hours. That's a bit slow. We could have speeded it up, maybe shot for an 8-hour bisque. As you can hear, we've done quite something to increase the mechanical strength of this clay. It's now strong enough to be able to withstand the handling that it's going to have during the glazing process. You can see also that the slips are fired hard onto the surface of the bisqueware, and that the colours, when we put this blue on, it was rather an anonymous grey colour, and it's now showing quite a nice blue. The next stage is glazing, and in preparation for that we need to put some wax on the bottom of some of the pots. So let's go do that. We're about to glaze these pots, so before we do, there's a couple of things that we need to do in preparation. The first is to check that there's no dust on the pots. The best way to ensure that is to see that the pots don't get dusty while you're storing them. The reason for not having dust on it is that the glaze may well crawl away from the dusty spots. So if you find you've got dusty spots, you can take them outside and blow them off. You don't want that dust in the room with you, so blow it off outside. Use a damp sponge, and you can sponge off any dustiness that's on the pot. This is also an opportunity to check around that there aren't any little burrs from the kiln or little pieces that you've left here, say where you've scribed through the slip, and if there are, you can either flick them off with your finger. They're only bisque, so they're not too strong. Or if there's any burry little bits on the bottom, now's your opportunity to sand them off with a coarse sandpaper, or in fact, my favourite implement is a little piece of old kiln shelf, and I just make sure that the bottom's smooth before I start. What we're going to do now is glaze these pots. So when they go into the kiln, it's very important, of course, that there be no glaze on the bottom of the pot, otherwise it'll stick to the shelf in the kiln. So you've got to make sure that when you glaze the pot, that there's no glaze where it touches the shelf. Now, you can ensure that by being careful when you glaze, and perhaps anything that does get on, you can wipe it off with a damp sponge. Or you can exclude glaze from it by using a commercial wax emulsion that you can buy from your ceramic suppliers. Or you can do what I prefer to do, and that's to use paraffin wax in an electric frying pan. Now, this is just regular paraffin that you'd use in canning, available in the supermarket or the ceramic suppliers, and a regular electric fry pan set at a medium temperature. Now the thing is, I'm using about 350 Fahrenheit here. The thing is to avoid smoking. You don't want the air to be full of paraffin vapor. Now, this of course is hot, so you've got to be careful, especially if you're working around kids. But this is a very good surface. It's easy to apply, it dries quickly, and it's durable. Okay, so you can either apply the paraffin. Note how I'm supporting myself so I won't dip it in inadvertently, by dipping, like so, scraping off as you take, making sure that it's dry before you turn it upside down, otherwise there'll be a little dribble of wax down the side of the pot, and you can see I've covered the bottom with wax. So now that when I dip this into the glaze, or pour glaze onto it, none of the water-based glaze will stick to the bottom of this pot. Now, we can also apply wax to the bottom by using a brush on the wheel. First of all, we set it up, or on a banding wheel for that matter. That's quite satisfactory too, but as before when I was decorating, a kick wheel is certainly an easy controllable tool. Okay, so we've just got a regular bristle paintbrush here, and as you take it out of the wax, make sure that you carry the brush horizontally. If you take the wax out of the brush and turn it upside down, wax will dribble straight out of it. So you've got to take the wax to the pot with a horizontal motion, apply it like so, quite deliberately, let it flow out of the brush, and then carry the brush away horizontally. If you tip the brush up as you move it away, you'll pour a blob of wax onto the, let me see if I can do it and I can show you how maybe to remove it. Yeah, see, that'd be the result of an inadvertency with the wax. So the way to remove that, if some tragedy like that happens, is first of all to let it dry before you handle it. So don't pick it up and then tip it so that the dribbles run further, and then you can burn it off with a propane torch. Hold it away from you, and Okay, now we can finish waxing this pot a little bit more carefully this time. Okay, there the pot's all waxed, so now we're ready to begin preparing to glaze. Let's go do that. Glazes are a glassy surface covering the outside of the pot. They consist primarily of three constituents. You've got a glass former, principally silica, you've got a flux which causes that glass former to melt, and you've got something that's in the glaze to increase the viscosity of it such that it won't run down onto the shelf when you're firing. That being said, glazes come in a wide variety of surfaces and of colors and textures. This particular one, which is the base glaze that we're using in this program, is a clear, colorless, glossy glaze. By contrast, you see that we have a matte glaze here, much lower reflectivity to its surface. It's quite a similar thing could be said about this one, which is an opaque white over a blue slip covering underneath. Clear glossy glazes are particularly suitable for the decorating techniques that we've emphasized in this program, because here we have the clear colorless glaze over the colored slips underneath. We've also added coloring oxides to our base glaze, and we've arrived at these three particular colors, and the percentages of the various minerals, the recipes for them will be given in the video programming. It's also possible to buy commercial glazes, and here's a color chart issued by the Spectrum company, and as you can see, a wide variety of colors, pretty well every color you could imagine, and surfaces and textures are available at both low fire and high fire. Commercially available glazes are used widely in the commercial pottery business. They're also very suitable for use in school situations, in that they come in small quantities like this and are frequently formulated for brush application, so that you can arrive at this sort of treatment of small hand-built items. It's a particularly festive looking little elephant. In order to get as complete an understanding as possible of the processes that go into the formation of a glaze, we're going to mix our own glaze from three fairly simple constituents. So let's go outside and do that. I prefer to mix my glazes outside. The challenge always when you're using ceramic materials is to avoid dust hazards. So organize yourself so that you minimize the amount of dust that you produce. Long ago I decided to eliminate the two most hazardous materials, and I no longer use barium or lead in my studio. Be that as it may, check with your ceramic supplier as to the relative toxicity of all the materials that you buy. To that end, I'm going to use a dust mask when I'm handling these powdered materials, and you can either get an approved dust mask through your ceramic supplier or through an industrial safety supply house. Okay, let's go and get going with these glazes. To mix a glaze or a slip like we used earlier in the program, first measure out the water you will need. The next step is to set your balance beam to 0 with the pan you're going to use to measure ingredients in place. Then, using your recipe, set the weights on your beam balance to the required weight and weigh out the ingredients. Lastly, dump the ingredients into the water, trying to minimize the amount of dust that you make. Okay, now that all the dusty materials are in the water, there's no dust hazard anymore, and we can stir the glaze up. It's always a good idea to mix your glazes the day before, in case you've used too much water, which in fact makes it easier to screen, because if there is too much water, it'll settle overnight and you can decant the superfluous water before you do use it. Okay, we're going to screen this through a fairly fine screen, sort of thing you can buy from your ceramic supplier. 80 mesh to the inch is the size that I use, and I get a piece of bronze screen here from a marine supplier and built it into this frame for a bit more convenience. Okay, so we'll pour it through the screen and then use a soft brush to coax it through the screen is the idea. Don't force it. You want this screen to last a long time. It may well be after you've let glazes sit for a while in the bucket that they'll go gummy in the bottom, and that you'll have to do this again to reconstitute them. Okay, that's the last of the glaze through the screen. Keep your glaze in a well-marked bucket. Once you've screened a glaze, they all tend to look the same, so keep it in a well-marked bucket so that you can tell one thing from another afterwards. Glazes are a wide and complex topic. Once you've got access to a kiln and you can melt things that you're testing, the world of experimentation is open to you. The essence of good experimentation is to change one thing at a time so that you can test the effect of what you're doing and to keep really good records. There are many good reference books on glazes available, and if you get caught by the experimental bug, consult a good book and it will give you some indication of how to pursue your interest. Okay, let's go put this glaze on some pots. We'll glaze these slip decorated pots with a clear glaze inside and out. And to do that, and this is the way you deal with any basically cylindrical object, pour glaze into the inside, steady hand right to the top, pour back into the jug so you can do the next one. Always good to be methodical around glazing. Okay, we're going to lower this into the glaze now. We're going to put it in a bit of an angle so that the liquid will come up on the inside and cover this piece that wasn't glazed, and then depress it until it's up to where we put the wax on the foot ring. Hold it for a 1-2 count and then lift it clear, tilting it as we lift it to break the surface. So down we go, 1, 2, up we come, bit of a tilt, out it comes, give it a shake to get the excess glaze off, and upright. And we might see that we've left a thumbprint there, so with a little bit on the end of the finger, like so, and you've glazed the pot, put it aside to dry. Okay, now something like this, too wide to fit into the bucket, and no matter how big your bucket, there's always going to be something that's too wide. So what you can do then is use a container like this. This is just a couple of simple pieces of wood, and we'll sit the pot on that, and we'll pour full of glaze going around the rim as we go, making sure not to overbalance. Okay, and then we can pour it back out into the bowl, working our way around to cover the rim, and then sit it down on the wooden bars like so. And now we can pour like so. And as soon as the glaze stops running, rotate it like that, lift it up from below, and anywhere you've made a little scar with your finger, you can just touch it up while it's all still wet. A bit over there didn't get glazed. As soon as the glazes have set up, we'll come along afterwards and clean up any excess glaze or smudged fingers, etc. on the bottom with a damp sponge. We've taken some of the bowls that were undecorated and we've glazed them, glazed the bisque directly with glaze. And now we're going to do some overglaze decoration on the top. I'm going to use some paint brushes and some mineral oxide that has been suspended in water to the consistency of about a thick ink. This one is cobalt carbonate in water, and this one is red iron oxide. You can get a whole range of colouring oxides and commercial stains and overglazes from your ceramic supplier. Okay, so let's see what we can do with this pot now with a couple of blue lines on first. Again, supporting the brush with both hands to get a secure line. And you can really tell the consistency of the consistency of the oxide is correct if it flows nicely onto the pot. The surface of a glazed pot is a particularly difficult one to apply decoration to because of the very absorbent surface, and you might find that before you go making irrevocable marks on a favourite piece, that you might want to practice the decoration on some newspaper or something, dry paper. Okay, so we've got a couple of blue lines on there. Let's see. I've used the opaque white glaze on these pots. That's to give an effective background to the brushwork decoration that we're now using. And let's see if we get a bit of a contrast here with Okay, let's finish off with a little bit of free-form stuff on some mugs until we've got enough pots to fill the kiln. In preparation for loading the glaze kiln, I've been dusting the shelves. I've been using a fine silica flour and applying it with this device here I've made out of a coffee can, the end cut out, piece of window screen on and taped. Of course, you've got to watch out. Powdered silica, the same cautions apply as when we were mixing glazes, and use your mask. The idea of coating the shelf with this silica flour is such that if there's any glaze on the bottom of the pot that you didn't wipe off prior to loading, or if any of the glazes run a little and run down onto the shelf, then the pot won't stick to the shelf. The run and the pot will come free of the shelf, and there won't be any marking and scarring on your shelf. Some potters choose to use a kiln wash made of 25% kaolin, 75% silica flour, mixed in the same way that we mix the slip when we're doing the decorating. And then that's just painted on with a paintbrush and allowed to dry, and it serves the same function. Okay, let's finish dusting down these shelves, and then we'll be ready to load the kiln. I'm starting the stack with a shelf in the bottom, just like we did in the bisque firing. Okay, nice and steady. You'll notice that my kiln sitter small cone is in. That's cone 01, which is a guard cone slightly above the temperature that we'll be firing the glaze firing to. As you stack on now, it's important that the rows of posts stay one above the other vertically, so that the load is transferred down through the same supports into the base of the kiln. Okay, now as we place the pots in the stack now, we've got to be aware of a couple of things. The first is, of course, that this is a glaze firing. These pots are mostly glazed, so of course they can't touch one another. At the top of the firing, when you've achieved temperature, these pots, which are now covered with a chalky dry substance, of course will be covered with a sticky liquid. So what you can't have are pots touching one another, because they'll fuse together at the point of contact. This is your last opportunity also to check that there is no glaze on the bottom of the pots, and if there is, wipe it off with a moist sponge. What we're looking to avoid is any problems with sticking to the shelves. Okay, well let's load some of these jugs in the bottom there. And what you're looking for basically is to keep each pot about 3/4 of an inch away from its neighbour, 3/4 of an inch away from the wall of the kiln. A good fat finger width clearance all around. As you build this stack up, just got to be careful for stability that each set of posts and extenders that you use is directly above the ones beneath. There we are, that's about it. Last thing I'll do is put some test tiles in. I've dipped these slabs of clay into little samples of glaze that I want to try, and we'll put them in and see how they do. Carefully mark them with iron oxide. Should you find yourself with anything that you're not really sure of the origins of it, this is a piece of riverbank clay here. We'll just place it on a piece of bisque and fire it, just in case it melts. We don't want it like a blob on the shelf. And lastly, the cones. The difference between the bisque firing and this one is that we've got 3 cones now. We're shooting for cone 02, indicated by the middle one, so we've got a lower cone here, cone 04, to more or less indicate to us that it's about time, so that we can watch this one. And this is a cone 01 here as a guard cone against overfiring. Now we'll place that in, as we did with the bisque firing, so that the cones will fall across our field of view. So place them at a slight angle to the center line of the spy hole. Last thing we'll do is check that the guard cone is in the kiln sitter, that its little cone is placed correctly, and I can see down there that it is, and that the sitter's armed on the outside, so everything's set for our kiln sitter. And the last thing we'll do is close the lid, and we're ready to fire. Okay, we've got the EnviroVent switched on. Last thing we need to do is set the limit switch for the time. We can expect that the glaze firing will take a little less long than the bisque firing. We can go a little faster at the beginning because we've already fired this clay. We're not concerned about explosions due to moisture now. So let's set it for 10 hours. Arm the firing button in the kiln sitter. Turn the elements onto low to begin, and then we'll turn it up gradually until we've achieved temperature. You can see that the first cone is down flat, and the target cone indicates that we've reached temperature. We can turn the kiln off now and let it cool overnight. The kiln's cooled down, and we've unloaded the pots, and here they are. I've separated them into 2 groups. These are the ones glazed with the opaque glaze. These are the ones glazed with the transparent gloss glaze over the slip decoration. In a piece such as this, I've initially covered the whole thing with a white slip broad brush, and then done the rim with a blue slip, egg sized through that with a loop tool, drawn the pattern with a stick, iron bearing slip, and then lastly a dollop of the white slip quite thickly applied, and around the rim here some of the green slip. The whole thing then dipped into the clear gloss glaze. There you see the original terracotta with no slip on it. And these pots here have been treated in a similar way, exactly the same technique really. On these ones, I've initially covered the whole thing with the opaque white glaze, and then I've decorated on top with oxides mixed with water with a brush. Here we've got rings of iron, and here the copper carbonate blue, iron again, and then lastly a splash of the green glaze applied with a brush. And this is the base glaze with a little chrome added to it. Once you've started to fire your own kiln, or you're in control of a firing, the world of experimentation is open to you. You can take the simplest of materials and make beautiful and interesting things from it. The idea is to keep experimenting. Every time you fire, make sure that there's some experiment in it so that you can further your knowledge and your experience. Enjoy this world of experimentation, and happy potting. Thank you.